Is it possible that I can do it advance?
Yes.
Because there's
It should work.
what's working.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Gerald and Matthias. My purpose today is to introduce or to provide an update or a progress report on a book manuscript that I've been working on for several years now, and that is the LCZ Field Guide. And so in doing that, we're going to shift scales dramatically from the global LCZ map down to the smallest of scales that you see in the photographs here. So the question that's been circulating in my mind for at least 5 years now is whether or not or why an LCZ field guide might be helpful to us. And that question is stimulated by the remarkable growth in the literature, and a lot of that has been driven by the very successful WUDAP project. However, there's always a side effect to such a rapid growth of literature, and one of them is the diversity of people and places, and especially individual interpretations of the LCZ scheme. So, in my mind, that implies a need for a field methodology to ground the system in its origins and its field-based roots. So, with that, I'm introducing the LCZ Field Guide here. This is a field guide that works in much the same way as any commercial field guide that you might pick up in a bookstore or a library. And the idea is that it's an illustrated manual, and it's based on a proven methodology for how we can identify and, more importantly, distinguish LCZ classes in the field. Now, I use the word field very loosely to mean a real setting or a virtual setting. It's very important that this guide can work in both settings. And in fact, it works better when it's used with outdoor experiences as well as those that we can get through a geo-browser like Google Earth. So this is, as I mentioned, this is based on a proven methodology, and fundamentally, the LCZ Field Guide is a product of classroom teaching in urban climatology. And that's been based at 3 institutions, primarily the National University of Columbia in South America. And this is where we run an annual urban climatology course. Now, the participants in that course are also participants in the development of the field guide. More recently, we've engaged participants at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver and also at the University of Chile. So here we have about 150 participants who have tested the field guide and given feedback on the competence of the field guide. So what is the purpose of that? It is to prepare the participants to engage in the process. So in order to do that, they have to have a pretty solid understanding of the LCZ concept. So that involves some background lecturing in urban climatology and some feature lecturing on the LCZ system itself. And then we move to some assessments, low stakes and high stakes assessments through an LCZ quiz. And I believe that quiz originated in 2015 at the WUDAP workshop in Hong Kong. That's correct, yeah. I love that exercise, and I use it in all my teaching. The high stakes assessment is a laboratory, a 3-hour laboratory activity, and here they're testing the guide by estimating key urban canopy parameters without any instruments or aid of technology, and then they use that to classify a site into its appropriate class. So in that lab, every participant works with a sheet like this. They're given 30 exercises. Each exercise is associated with a set of geographic coordinates. They put the coordinates into Google Earth, and then they follow a sequence of steps, identification steps 1 through 10. And then they arrive at a final answer. And when they're finished, the sheet looks something like this. It's coded, and it's full of scribbles and scratches. However, as the instructor, I go immediately to the final answer, whether it's correct or not. However, that in itself is not particularly useful. What I want to know is at what stage of the thought process did something go wrong? The final answer really tells me nothing. So in this case, we go back and we can see that step 9 and step 5 are problematic because those are associated with an incorrect final answer. So for me, that's very helpful. I can go back and revise the guide because often the problem is with the field guide itself, not with the participant. So maybe it needs to be written differently or communicated in a better way. So After looking at 100 of those sheets over 5 years, we start to see patterns that are very, very helpful, and they identify exactly where the problems are and where the pitfalls are located. So these are the results from 6 versions of the field guide. We can see that it's fairly consistent, giving us a response of about 85% correct. The only exception here is the University of Chile, and that was the pandemic year, and so there was no face-to-face instruction of the participants. And clearly that's a factor for why that is a little bit lower than the other ones. So the field guide itself here, as I said, it's laid out in much the same manner as any field guide. So this includes the purpose and why we might need to identify LCZs, a little bit about preparation before going into the field, and what we might do when we get back from the field. And some people have been asking me about landform classes and subclasses. Those are also included here. But most importantly is the section which gives detailed instructions for how to use the guide, and that's based on something called the LCZ field sheets. So there are 10 field sheets. Each sheet is associated with one step in the identification process. It's very systematic, and we follow a sequence of steps that together provide the skills to make a good judgment as to what class we might be located in when we're in the field. So you might think that the field sheets look quite similar to the data sheets, and they do, but the content is totally different. The data sheets contain all the technical and descriptive information about an LCZ class, but they say nothing about the methodology for how you might identify them. The field sheets take all of that information and integrate it into a workable methodology, which is very simple. At the top of each field sheet is a branding question or instruction that tells us what is the purpose of this step. Below that is an explanation about why that step is important, to give it some context, how we might complete it, and most importantly, what is the next step in that sequence. Following that are some views from the field. These are hand-selected photographs that show physical features of LCZs which are directly associated with the actions and decisions that are required to reach an acceptable determination of the class that we're in. And then the bottom part of the sheet is my favorite. These are some tips and tactics that we can employ in the field. So here are some visual clues based on what we see, some hints, some suggestions, and I think most importantly, there are some cognitive strategies that we can use to come up with mental estimations of urban canopy parameters. No instruments required. Okay, so just a demonstration of the sequence. Step 1 takes us into the field and instructs us to view the area from multiple perspectives. So some guidance is given about that in the sheet itself. And then we go to step 2. And in step 2, the question is, are buildings a relevant feature inside the area? That's not an easy question, but the field sheet makes it a little bit simpler. If the answer is no, we go to step 8. If the answer is yes, we go to step 3. And so we carry on like this. Here we are in step 3. We make a judgment as to the heights of the buildings. Again, this is a difficult step for most participants. If we determine them to be low-rise, we go to step 5. And then the question is, are the buildings qualitatively large? Again, not an easy question, but much of it is explained in the sheets. So we carry on like this until we reach a final determination of our LCZ class. So you might think that that's a lot of work to classify one site or one area, and it is. But the point is, it's an educational process, and all of the content in those sheets is stored in our minds, and then we recall it when we need it. And then when we've safely mastered the sheets, we go to a flow chart like that, and we can work through it much more quickly, referring back to the sheets only when they're needed. So there are many uses for a field guide, just as there are many uses for the LCZ system itself. And the one that's most personal to me it is a teaching tool and a learning aid, not only for the LCZ system itself, but for urban climatology in general. And it's a wonderful entry into the field of urban climate. It gets us away from our computers, into the streets and into the canyons, and interacting with all of the sensory experiences that we can find in every city and every neighborhood. We can also use it to classify meteorological sensors in the city, and I hope that this is used in a way that teaches us to discover the value of in-person classifications of meteorological sensors. Often we discover things in the field that are not evident on our computer screens, and this is exactly the point of the field guide. So this being a WUDAP session, I leave it to the users to identify if there is a need for a field guide like this. I think there is. I think it can be helpful in a number of ways. The first one here is with level 0 maps. I realize there's lots of excellent guidance materials that are on the website that Benjamin and Matthias have developed. Perhaps this is one more that might add a little bit of context to the sensory experiences in an LCZ class. Level 1 is also a good opportunity to collect precise data as we're navigating a street, following the guidelines in the book itself. So just to summarize it, in my opinion, the field guide gives us a very rich sensory experience that we can't get often when we're working on our laptops, and it also sharpens our powers of observation. This is critically important in the age of information and technology and so on. The guide is written and designed to be accessible to anyone. Okay? It doesn't require sophisticated training in climatology or anything else. And it can be used by novice workers with LCZ or experts. And I know there are a lot of experts in this field, and even I have learned a lot by reading and writing these sheets. So I think there's a benefit to anybody. Some people ask me when the guide is ready. I don't know exactly. I'm a notoriously slow writer, but give me a few more months and I think I'll have a full draft online somewhere. So Gerald, I'll stop with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, it's absolutely needed.
Okay, that's right.
Especially because I think that when we try to address global climate change issues and what they mean at a scale which people actually live, this gives real sort of in situ meaning to urban climate. It shows you, by the way, the advantage of the IUC. I don't know that we could have leveraged the ideas that he was given to us without the IUC to share it. So, in fact, I remember that Hong Kong event where we had some supreme experts on climate, and they misclassified just about everything we gave them as an image, and we asked them which classification. One was a graveyard, which kept being told was LCZ2, I think it was. They had to scale it.
I still use that graveyard photo and all those t-shirts.
It's to mark as to whether they are.
Yeah.
So I have time for one question, if that's okay.
Give the mic to somebody.
Oh, yeah, the lady down there. Just doing it.
What's the appropriate grid spacing for conducting an LCZ map? Because when you use the LCZ in the work or some simulations, the resolution is always around 500 meters or 1 kilometers. Then even if you have a very high resolution LCZ map like 30 meters, it will downscale the resolution to every LCZ map. Do you have any ideas about this action? Thank you.
Yeah, there's lots of information about that. I'm going to answer your question in relation to the field guide, and this will start you off at a spatial scale of 250 meters around a point. Okay, so these sheets instruct you to go to that point, whether you're in a Google Earth or on the ground, and consider a classification area of about 250 meters circle around it. Okay, that will be different from the global, the LCZ mapping, and I think these guys can help you here much more than I can. But that's a guideline that comes from the 2012 paper, a few hundred meters, and that's a good starting point. But I realize it's different when you're working with automated mapping. I won't get into that now.
I think the critical thing about the LCZ is that they were designed for neighborhoods, whereas grids don't necessarily correspond with
recording until
neighborhoods.
I have to keep
So that's why you
recording
have those issues. In fact, thank you very much, Ian.
Thank you, Charles.